The Making of a Luna. Previous episodes are available on the playlist. You can also visit our website for your favorite stories. A link is provided in the video description. Episode 11. We appreciate you sharing this information with us. It is plausible that she is currently engaged in activities that render her unavailable to respond to telephone calls. A discussion with her will be scheduled at a later time. Goodbye. Parker maintained his composure, maintaining his politeness. Thereafter, the assailant rapidly advanced, forcibly propelling the reluctant Myrna in his wake. The following is a list of key elements that must be included in any discussion of this subject. For what reason did you decide to disengage from the situation? Had we engaged in further dialogue with her, it would have been possible to ascertain Elara's location. Myrna informed her husband, while they were still descending the stairs towards their automobile. The responsibility for maintaining awareness of the student's location falls upon the secretary. However, this does not imply that she would disseminate this information to others. It is reasonable to assume that there is a valid reason for the girl's non-response to calls. Parker articulated a sense of resignation with a sigh. Could it be that Elara's anger had not yet been assuaged? Despite this, there remains a sense of concern. Myrna replied. The aforementioned female had already been permitted to cool down for several months. This should have sufficed. It is evident that the young lady in question has exhibited a marked increase in arrogance since her initiation into the student body. This transformation in her personality is particularly noteworthy, as it stands in contrast to her previous demeanor. Do you wish for the general public to be aware of the present state of our relationship with our daughter? It is evident that even the secretary had begun to notice some peculiarities after only a few words. Parker expressed displeasure, employing the pack link. The potential benefits of disclosing her identity as a moonlight to others were significant, yet this information remained concealed due to the absence of evidence regarding her filial care. Myrna ultimately became tranquil and ceased to vocalize further. She came to the realization that her husband's assertions were accurate, yet they lacked alternative methods of communication. The sole individual to whom she would respond to the call was Lucien, who had previously done so. However, during the last interaction between them, an external party intervened, effectively preventing her from responding to Lucien. Pardon me, but might I inquire as to whether you are the parents of Alpha Quinn? Upon hearing their daughter's name and title articulated by an unfamiliar male voice, the couple halted their advance, just as they were about to enter their vehicle. Their gazes then turned toward the handsome, blonde young man. Based on his physical appearance, it was deduced that he was enrolled as a student at the academy. Affirmative, we are. Despite our best efforts to contact her by telephone, we have been unsuccessful. Our primary concern pertains to her well-being. Are you aware of her current location? Her father inquired, his demeanor unmistakably conveying the sentiment of a concerned progenitor. It is possible that she is still in a period of convalescence. It is possible that she did not wish to cause concern. The young man responded, attempting to rationalize the lack of response to her telephone call. They had also endeavored to contact her via telephone, however, she had not responded for a period of 4 days. Their instructor, Elias, instructed them to wait a while longer, but they were still concerned. It is conceivable that the subject's alpha status was genuinely compromised, as evidenced by her inability to respond to even her parents. Recuperating? What transpired? Her mother inquired, her tone conveying a mixture of confusion and concern. Oh, she sustained an injury during one of our training exercises. She is currently at the palace. The young man provided a response. We appreciate your communication, young man. Let us proceed expeditiously. Parker then proceeded to depart, indicating an immediate intention to leave. Myrna concurred and promptly entered the vehicle, but her concerns had dissipated. The young lady in question had demonstrated a remarkable aptitude for mendacity. In order to deliberately maintain proximity to the king, she feigned injuries and asserted that they were more severe than they actually were. A few days prior, she appeared to be in optimal condition during her participation in the ball, and she engaged in combat with another werewolf. It is evident that she had not anticipated her capacity to exert such a profound influence over a male individual through seduction. It is evident that she had placed significant expectations on Elara. Zane inquired about the identity and motivations of the individuals in question, as well as the rationale behind disclosing the Alpha's present location and condition. A query was posed to Ronan, who was just beginning to descend the stairs. They were Elara's parents, and they were searching for her. Our Alpha did not wish to cause concern, and thus did not disclose her injuries to them. She has not responded to their calls. Zane's response indicated a sense of satisfaction in his ability to circumvent potential misinterpretations by her parents regarding her character. It is truly perplexing to comprehend the method by which you successfully completed the exams and obtained your certification as a moonlight. In fact, the Alpha should have expelled you from the ring at that time. Ronan articulated a sigh, while applying pressure to his temple with his hand. What is your intended implication? Zane inquired of Ronan, visibly disconcerted, that he had just committed an act of benevolence. However, Ronan persistently regarded Zane as intellectually deficient. Our Alpha has been injured for several weeks. It would be interesting to know whether her parents have visited recently. If the individuals in question were genuinely concerned about her well-being, they would have initiated contact with her at an earlier stage. It should be noted that, despite her injury, she has periodically responded to our inquiries. The subject's failure to respond to any of her parents' calls indicates a complete absence of relationship with them. Or have you forgotten how quickly she returned from her previous vacation? Ronan elucidated the situation to Zane, who appeared perplexed. It was only at this point that Zane came to the realization that Ronan's assertions were indeed accurate. However, this revelation left him with a pressing question: what course of action could he take in response? Disregard that notion. In any event, the subject in question has demonstrated the capacity to manage the situation independently. It should be noted that there is no perceived risk associated with engaging in dialogue with her parents. Moreover, should she express a clear reluctance to see them, the security personnel will not permit them to enter. It is imperative to exercise greater caution in the future to avoid such occurrences. Ronan endeavored to allay the pale man's concerns. The following assertion is made: the location in question is the palace. Having rested in a manner that was uncharacteristically comfortable and cozy, Elara gradually opened her eyes, rousing herself from her slumber. Her eyes required a period of acclimatization to the morning light before they could fully adjust, and during this period, they widened in surprise. She had previously anticipated an inability to sleep, but Theron's embrace proved to be an effective counteragent. It is evident that the subject's sleep quality has undergone a significant improvement, as evidenced by her sleeping like a baby. Moreover, she has exhibited a spontaneous and deliberate tendency to cling to him, metaphorically resembling a monkey in its attachment. Theron's hand was placed under her head, yet it appeared to be the sole part of his body that made physical contact with her, as if guided by an external force. The subject's proximity to the object was marked by her head being positioned on his hand, her face in close proximity to his, and her hand extended on his chest, embracing him. Additionally, her right foot was positioned in a manner that encircled his legs. She remained motionless, only periodically monitoring his respirations. In order to ascertain that he was indeed still asleep, she proceeded with caution, gradually raising her leg which, from her perspective, was in a particularly compromising position and placing it on her other foot. She made every effort to refrain from making any sounds during this process. However, it is possible that he perceived the movement, as he then uttered a faint utterance, concurrently moving his face even closer to hers. His long, curled eyelashes were now in proximity to her eyes, his nose nearly touching hers, and his lips were also at a dangerously close distance. She closed her mouth, which she had opened in fright a second before, afraid that even the air she breathed could be perceived by him, thus rousing him from his slumber. Subsequently, with the utmost gentleness she could muster, she endeavored to disengage her hand. However, she had barely engaged her hand muscles, elevating her body only marginally, when he placed his hand upon hers. Her initial reaction was to assume that he had awakened, but his eyes remained closed. She remained motionless, uncertain how to proceed without disturbing him. The subject was too embarrassed to be in this situation. In the event that she had retired for the night nestled in a corner, embraced by his embrace, the experience would have been amplified. In this scenario, it is the male character who is depicted as the one who would be clinging, not the female character. However, further deliberation on the part of the author regarding subsequent actions was not necessary. His lips, full and pouty, elevated in a manner evocative of a devilish smirk, while his blue eyes opened gradually, arriving precisely at the moment when he beheld her countenance of helplessness. "What is the nature of your current activity?" he inquired hoarsely, his voice exhibiting a lower tone due to the effects of sleep. "Your Highness, I merely attempted to reclaim my hand, which you had forcibly seized," she swiftly articulated, with a sense of accomplishment, the rationale behind the hand's position on his chest. "Is that so?" he inquired in a light-hearted manner. The response was affirmative. She attempted to maintain her composure, attempting to instill confidence in her words. "Furthermore, I was the individual who positioned your foot on mine. Your pronounced tendency to sleep deeply may be a factor in your inability to perceive these movements," he inquired, accompanied by a hint of amusement. Acknowledging his persistent awareness of her actions and his ability to sense her movements, she expressed displeasure, attempting to wrest her hand away forcefully. However, his grip remained unyielding. "Your Highness, I implore you to release me." Her demeanor was characterized by a sense of discomposure and a reserved mien. "Theron." "What?" Elara inquired, her tone conveying a sense of bewilderment at the mention of his name. Refer to me as Theron, and I will comply," he stated, his gaze fixed intently on her eyes, that he was pleased. "Theron, it is imperative that you relinquish your grip." On this occasion, she articulated her statement in a subdued tone. In an effort to avoid exacerbating the situation, he acquiesced, allowing her to proceed. She did not delay, instead, she rapidly proceeded on foot to the restroom. It is perplexing that she was able to fall asleep so readily in the presence of an individual with whom she had only recently become acquainted. This is particularly noteworthy given that she had not previously exhibited any indications of romantic attraction or social engagement with members of the opposite sex. The rationale behind this assertion is that he is our comrade. In response to her rhetorical inquiry, Sable provided a detailed account. "If that were the case, I would not experience such discomposure upon awakening and perceiving his proximity." She transmitted her message through the utilization of a mental link. During sleep, the subconscious mind assumes control. It fulfills the desires of the conscious mind while simultaneously evading the constraints imposed by the preconscious mind. Sable articulated, her tone conveying a sense of amusement. Elara ceased to respond to Sable, and furthermore, did not refute her statements. Sable was her wolf, and Elara was the individual with whom she shared the most intimate knowledge. The question arises as to how such a phenomenon could occur, and the answer lies in the dynamics of internal conflict. The conflict was inherently unequal, and it was evident that a victory was unattainable for her. It was fortunate, therefore, that by the time she ventured out of the restroom, Theron had already departed. It was unnecessary for her to ponder his whereabouts, as a domestic servant shortly rapped on the door. The domestic worker, identified as Jenna, was the individual who had provided care to her during her stay in the guest room. Consequently, she had become acquainted with her, and she assisted Elara by procuring her attire and various essential items from the other room. Receiving assistance from an individual with whom she had an existing relationship proved to be beneficial, however, she experienced a sense of discomfort due to the location they were currently in. In contrast, Jenna, an experienced maid, adopted her usual demeanor, assisting Elara in establishing a sense of ease. She had also apprised her of Theron's current location and inquired about her plans for the day. The stipulation Theron had previously outlined for her was that she reside in the royal palace during the weekends. Given that the previous day had been a Friday, Elara would remain in the palace until Monday morning, at which point she would return to the academy to resume her classes. Fortunately, breakfast proceeded without incident, as Theron remained engrossed in his professional responsibilities and had already eaten in his office. Consequently, she ate alone, thereby gaining some personal time to adjust to the numerous changes that had transpired in such a brief period. Over the past 6 months, her life had undergone a radical transformation, but the previous month was particularly eventful. In order to enjoy a period of solitude, she proceeded to the location where she experienced the greatest sense of ease, the royal garden. Jenna's thoughtful gesture extended to providing her with a book, aiming to facilitate a moment of relaxation. The act of reposing on the verdant expanse of grass while engaging with a compelling romance novel proved to be a truly exceptional experience. The sole issue was that even the romance novel continued to associate her with Theron. The question arises whether the resemblance between the male character and Theron was intentional, or whether it was merely a coincidence. This is particularly evident in the scene in which the male character expresses his affection for the female character. Upon further consideration, she experienced a blush, accompanied by a slight elevation of her lips, which manifested as a smile. It was previously assumed that the royal garden was an area that could be entered without significant concern. A voice of a high, screechy nature made an audible interruption, disrupting Elara's internal musings. The voice was one with which she was familiar, though she did not welcome its presence. I concur with this assessment. It was stated by His Highness that the location is not accessible to the general public. Elara articulated her sentiments in a composed manner, disregarding the individual who had approached her and exhibited a demeanor of patronization, neglecting even the basic courtesy of a greeting. It is unwise to assume that you are of significant importance. The fact that one was in the company of the aforementioned individual during the ball and was fortunate during the altercation does not, in and of itself, constitute sufficient evidence to determine that one is indeed a queen. It is imperative to recognize the necessity of addressing these issues with the utmost urgency and to take actionable steps towards their resolution. Martha articulated her sentiments with a hint of exasperation. The woman, who materialized abruptly, had surreptitiously obtained the man she had labored for years to win. It is noteworthy that the subject's infancy preceded her romantic involvement with Theron. Her failure to act similarly can be attributed to her awareness of the fact that all those who had approached him with the intention of becoming his partner had been firmly rebuffed. It is evident that she initially exerted significant effort, recognizing his appreciation for strength. Moreover, she was cognizant that, should he not be receptive, the counsel would likely be. The counsel she received from her grandfather was instrumental in persuading the other council members to plead on her behalf, seeking her appointment as queen. Given that the idea would not originate from her own initiative, she would be inclined to accept it with gratitude and composure. As she prepared to confront him from a superior vantage point, he would have also overcome his desire to locate his true mate and would have accepted her, at the very least, on the basis of her status as the most formidable female werewolf. However, the introduction of a female alpha, who also happened to be a moonlight, introduced a new dynamic to the situation. Her actions had catastrophic consequences for him, resulting in the dissolution of all his plans. Consequently, despite her desire to maintain her facade, it was unfeasible in the presence of Elara. Her anger was so profound that it induced the desire to extinguish the life of the rose she had approached while engaged in conversation. The subject continually imagined that the black rose with a stem as fragile as a night-blooming rose was Elara. It is imperative to cease inflicting harm upon the rose. Elara articulated her sentiments with slightly more intensity, while Sable permitted her alpha aura to emanate. As Martha approached, she was observed standing and holding the rose in a protective position, having released it slightly due to her initial alarm. Upon contact with Elara, the black rose underwent a transformation, becoming transparent and subsequently acquiring a blue hue with subtle white accents along its edges. This occurrence transpired under the astonished gaze of a perplexed Varak. Do you require further evidence to substantiate this claim? Theron inquired of the head council member, as the group approached the two women. Martha exhibited a startled response to the unanticipated auditory stimulus. She was unaware that the elderly gentleman would persuade Theron with such ease to convene with her and had strayed from the designated waiting area. Upon observing the indoor garden that had captivated her since childhood, she ventured inside and was dismayed to encounter Elara. Her anger overwhelmed her rational faculties. It is possible that the participants had been privy to the preceding dialogue. The subject's refusal to comply with the request was unequivocal. Verek's immediate response was a firm denial, while he endeavored to maintain a composed demeanor. Internally, however, he experienced a profound sense of elation, manifesting as tears of joy. The mate of the king, whom they had relinquished all hope of, the sole individual capable of rendering the fairy's flower display a blue hue, and the queen of the werewolves. Theron had just informed him that there was no need for him to persist in his search for a mate, as he had found his true mate. However, Verek, perhaps due to the protracted nature of their search, found it difficult to accept his assertion. The purpose of their visit to the garden was to request that Elara physically interact with one of the roses, thereby substantiating her claim to the throne. It is noteworthy that the aforementioned individual was engaged in this particular activity. To be candid, had Theron not requested that he maintain confidentiality, at least until the individual responsible for the attacks had been apprehended, the elder would have already been prostrating himself before the progenitor of the werewolves. However, this was not a possibility. However, the least that could be expected of him was to remove the individual who had caused her discomfort. We shall commence our departure. Lady Martha, if you please. Verek indicated his desire for her to accompany him, gesturing towards her with his hand. He was unable to converse with Elara due to his apprehension that he might address her by her title rather than her name. The aforementioned individual would convey his greeting at a later time during a private meeting. However, the head council member, Martha, endeavored to voice her objection. Lady Martha, we respectfully request our release. I will address you further upon my return. Verek articulated this sentiment with a heightened degree of emphasis. Martha found herself unable to contribute further to the discussion. The council had become her most significant source of support. Should the head council member register dissatisfaction with her, she may forfeit the opportunity to approach Theron for good. Your Highness, I have an important piece of information that I neglected to convey. During my journey to this location, I had the opportunity to meet the beta version of the Silverhold Pack and his spouse. They are currently in the waiting room awaiting an opportunity to visit their daughter. Verek recollected this fact prior to his departure. Theron's annoyance with the elderly individual was palpable, as he found the decision to bring those people to the palace perplexing. Elara's silence and sighing indicated her internalized distress. The subject's morning was uneventful, however, her afternoon was marked by visits from unanticipated guests. The atmosphere in the garden became slightly uncomfortable when left unattended. This encounter marked the first time the two had met each other since she had absconded in the morning, taking refuge in the bathroom. Elara, would you prefer to convene with your parents? In the event that I am unable to attend, I would be willing to attend in your stead. Theron, having been silent for some time, finally broke the silence as he proceeded towards her, awaiting her response. There is no need for that. It is therefore necessary to determine the most effective method for posing this question to you. I will personally attend the event. She asserted this position with a high degree of conviction. I am your companion, naturally you are at liberty to do so. Merely utter the word, and I shall forthwith dismiss them. Theron's affirmation was delivered with a firm and confident voice, accompanied by the subtle adjustment of a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I am genuinely grateful for your assistance. I possess the capacity to manage them effectively. It is possible that their purpose was merely to assess my well-being. I will converse with them briefly." Elara, in a state of heightened emotional arousal, uttered the word made in a direct address to her companion, her blush accentuating the vividness of her response. While she was appreciative of his attentiveness, she acknowledged that addressing her parents' needs was her responsibility. Upon observing the moist, sparkling brown eyes appearing from beneath, Theron experienced a marked acceleration in his heart rate, and he immediately began to examine her pink lips. Elara discerned the significance of his dilated pupils and, perceiving his gaze shift toward her lips, stepped backward and hastily proceeded toward the door. Her retreat did not evoke any response from him. Acknowledging her discomfort, he perceived a certain charm in her demeanor and merely smiled slightly, allowing her to depart without interruption. The initial phase of the relationship was characterized by its affectionate and endearing qualities, which led to a reluctance on his part to accelerate the pace of the relationship. He expressed a certain degree of satisfaction with the prevailing atmosphere, at least for the time being. The following is a list of key elements that must be included in any discussion of this subject. Elara proceeded in the wake of Jenna, who had been awaiting at the garden's entrance to escort her to the waiting room. Given her prior experience, she was already familiar with the location of the room, having previously visited during Jackson's stay. However, Jenna insisted on being in close proximity, particularly when Elara was not resting alone or in the presence of Theron. This insistence was particularly pronounced in the presence of guests. The order was issued by His Highness, and it was imperative that she comply. Elara, in an effort to avoid placing her in a challenging situation, refrained from insisting on proceeding alone. In any case, the experience was preferable to that of Theron's arrival with her. He had previously discerned that her relationship with her parents was not characterized by affection, but the distinction between awareness and observation was not lost on him. She inhaled deeply and then gestured toward Jenna, who had already placed her hand on the doorknob. The latter was awaiting her authorization to open the door. "Elara." The dulcet voice, reminiscent of honeyed syrup, emanated from within the room as soon as the door was opened. The subject advanced a mere 2 steps into the room before being engulfed in her mother's embrace. The mother was already weeping. This display was an unfamiliar one to Elara, as her mother had never embraced her in such a manner, nor had she ever been seen to shed tears over her well-being. The inquiry posed sought to ascertain the well-being of the individual in question. Myrna inquired, releasing the rigid Elara, who had not reciprocated the embrace. The subject's affirmation of their well-being is equivocal, employing the conjunction yes and the disjunctive pronoun of course to hedge their response. Elara's response was characterized by surprise in response to the inquiry posed. The inquiry posed pertains to the status of the subject's injuries, specifically whether the healing process has been completed. Myrna persisted in her interrogation, while simultaneously conducting a visual examination for the presence of any discernible wounds on Elara. "Injuries?" In response, Elara posed a query. The inquiry regarding the nature and timing of the injuries was not without its own particular logic, given that the subject had sustained them several weeks prior. The motivation behind the mother's decision to inquire about the wounds at this particular juncture was not immediately apparent. We have recently arrived from the academy, where we were informed by a young man that you have been injured. It is difficult to convey the extent of our dismay upon learning of your injuries through third parties. Myrna attributed this to her actions, experiencing a sense of slight irritation in response to the situation. The injuries sustained were of a minor nature during a training exercise involving other students. I am already in a satisfactory state, and my regeneration process was initiated shortly thereafter. Elara endeavored to minimize the perception of her actual problems. Firstly, the investigation into the attack was still underway, therefore, she was unaware of the extent to which she could disclose information regarding the matter. For two individuals, an extended visit would be permissible, provided they had a legitimate justification for doing so. However, she was keen on avoiding such a circumstance. She continued to experience a sense of unease in their presence, and she harbored uncertainty regarding the possibility of ever feeling at ease in their company once more. During her 5-month absence, she reflected extensively on her past, endeavoring to identify a single instance in which her parents had demonstrated a genuine concern for her well-being. However, her efforts yielded only the realization that she had been egregiously misguided in placing such profound reliance on them. In retrospect, she was unable to fathom that they had at least provided her with clothing and sustenance. Given her substantial contribution to domestic tasks, it would be more accurate to conceptualize her compensation as a form of remuneration for services rendered, akin to that of a domestic worker. Consequently, she would be responsible for procuring the necessities of life through her own means. While she was aware that her thoughts were ethically and morally incorrect, she found herself unable to prevent them from forming in her mind. It is imperative to examine the rationale behind parents' decisions to prioritize the completion of household chores and assist their siblings with their homework, often only after these tasks have been addressed. While it is true that her mother was the primary agent who instigated her to engage in these behaviors, her father's passive acceptance and tacit approval of her actions were equally, if not more, significant factors. At a certain juncture, Lucien initiated the process of completing his academic assignments independently, declining her offer of assistance. However, influenced by her mother, Elara acquiesced to this arrangement and subsequently neglected her academic responsibilities. Despite Elara's concerns, which included the potential long-term consequences of Elara's lack of formal education, Myrna did not implement any measures to address the situation. Her academic performance, which was comparable to that of two individuals, was indicative of her mother's negligence in nurturing her potential. The numerous sleepless nights she endured were a testament to her mother's disregard for her future prospects. However, the young man who conversed with us at the palace indicated that you are still recuperating. It has come to my attention that I have arrived at the palace for a specific purpose. Myrna inquired, her tone conveying a hint of perplexity, though she had already formed suspicions regarding the matter. It is evident that the reason for this phenomenon is. Elara articulated her sentiments with a certain degree of reluctance, acknowledging the absence of a compelling rationale for her presence. The underlying truth, which she was reluctant to disclose to her parents, was a matter of significant personal significance. Given her relationship with her mother, it is reasonable to assume that she would be enthusiastic about becoming in-laws with Theron. It is possible that she would even demand that he mark her, which would result in complications for Naira. It is also noteworthy that Myrna could potentially influence her decision regarding her continued participation in the Moonlight program. It is evident that she would not be inclined to heed her mother's counsel, and thus, the futility of such an endeavor becomes apparent. There are no separate dorm rooms for girls at the building intended for the Moonlight students at the academy, nor are there any spare rooms in the buildings housing the other courses. In light of this fact, His Highness has decreed that Miss Quinn shall reside at the palace, where ample space is available, at least during weekends. Jenna intervened on her behalf. Indeed, it was the very reason he had made her say it. Unbeknownst to them, Jenna was reporting each word in real time to Theron via the pack link. Elara exhaled with a sense of relief, expressing gratitude to Jenna for her intervention that had led to her deliverance. Indeed, she had considerable experience in the field of domestic service. This outcome was anticipated for an individual in such close proximity to Theron. Is that correct? We must express our profound gratitude to His Highness for his benevolence. For the first time since her entry, Parker intervened. It is evident that the aforementioned course of action is the correct one. Her mother's consent was promptly forthcoming. The occasion presented a unique and ideal opportunity to encounter the king. It can be posited that the individual in question possesses a degree of affection for Elara. This hypothesis is supported by the fact that he permitted her to reside in the palace and even escorted her to the ball. Despite the visual limitations imposed by the distance, the subject's interaction with the ball was not overlooked by His Highness. Following Elara's abrupt departure, the king also vanished shortly thereafter. It is unfortunate that they were unable to attend the king's table before his departure. Elara was a young woman, and therefore it was reasonable to assume that she lacked the knowledge necessary to comprehend the royal protocol. However, this assumption was not supported by the evidence. The royal family had invited Elara and her family to the winter ball on multiple occasions, indicating that they had become familiar with the royal family and their customs. Therefore, it would be unreasonable to continue to use the same excuse. It is conceivable that an encounter with the individual in question is now a possibility. It is reasonable to assume that, by becoming acquainted with the king, their status could only rise. I apologize, but His Highness is currently preoccupied. Despite residing in close proximity, I have not had the opportunity to make his acquaintance. I will apprise him of my observations should I encounter him. Elara articulated her sentiments with a countenance devoid of emotion, a visage that would befit a discourse with guests rather than with her progenitors. She was growing weary of conversing with them. Given the presence of Jenna in the room and the potential for Theron to overhear their conversation if he chose to do so, she endeavored to maintain as much courtesy in her speech as possible. However, she found herself experiencing a sense of physical discomfort when confronted with the parents who had previously deceived her. It is evident that the individual in question has consented to the proposed course of action. Subsequently, the father provided a response. He expressed a modicum of discontent regarding his inability to address the monarch directly. Given the temporal parameters of Elara's anticipated presence, which is estimated to span a year or more, and the potential for an extended duration, it is reasonable to conclude that the opportunity for an encounter with the king is imminent. This is predicated on the premise that the relationship between Elara and the king undergoes a period of restoration and re-establishment. Following a brief period of uncomfortable silence, during which her parents were the sole contributors to the ongoing dialogue, her mother once again initiated speech. It is recommended that a period of conversation be allocated in order to address the feelings of absence experienced by the subject. The subject's emotional state is characterized by a sense of longing for the other party, which is expressed as a desire to sit and talk for a while. The term "my baby girl" is used in a familial and affectionate manner. Let us endeavor to convene as a trio, exclusively for the purpose of this discussion. Myrna attempted to suggest that the domestic servant depart. She perceived Elara's rigidity and her courteous utterances, which only served to accentuate the alienation inherent in their distant relationship. In order to persuade her daughter to relinquish her past grievances and re-establish her authority over her, it was necessary for her to engage in a private dialogue with Elara. It is difficult to comprehend how she could assert that the issue of her sister's potential theft of one's partner should be disregarded, particularly when there is evidence of her family providing assistance to her alongside the domestic worker. Her actions would have been counterproductive. It is conceivable that the domestic servant could have informed the king of the incident. Historically, the royal family has traditionally maintained a significant population of werewolves who exhibit unparalleled loyalty to their mates. In the event that the king's mate is identified as an Omega, the king would swiftly and unmistakably recognize her as his true mate, marking her as such to affirm her legitimacy, without hesitation or ambiguity. It has even been alleged that the reigning monarch has been actively seeking a consort for multiple decades before ultimately abandoning the endeavor. The prevailing hypothesis among werewolves posits that he maintained clandestine romantic relationships in this locale, though he had never selected a consort. Upon hearing the utterance of "baby girl" by her mother, she experienced a state of involuntary tremor, accompanied by the hair on her arms and the back of her neck standing up. The subject had surpassed the age that her mother had designated as the appropriate point for endearments to be used in addressing her. The contrived sentiment that accompanied these expressions only served to exacerbate the discomfort. "That is correct, my dear. There are several issues that require our attention and discussion." Her father concurred, further exacerbating her already uncomfortable position. "I regret to inform you that Miss Elara is already committed to other obligations. It is evident that students have limited leisure time, as indicated by the Moonlight students' limited availability." The domestic worker interjected with marked firmness, despite the fact that her verbal articulation mirrored that which Theron had directed her to express. The tone she employed was, in essence, her own prerogative. Even Jenna could discern that their words and actions did not genuinely reflect their true sentiments. She had been attending to Elara on a daily basis, yet the latter never received a call from her parents, not even a single one. "Pardon us, but we are the subject's parents. On what basis do you presume the authority to intervene? It is imperative to respect the privacy of our daughter and allow us the opportunity to manage her care without undue interference." Her mother's raised voice and subsequent display of her true temperament were noted. It is imperative to refrain from raising one's voice towards an individual merely carrying out their professional duties. If there is a particular point that one wishes to articulate, it is possible to do so at this juncture in the presence of Jenna. Otherwise, we will speak via telephone at a later time. Elara elevated her voice slightly, adding a heightened intensity to her utterance. While she was accustomed to her mother's temper, Jenna did not need to be informed of its severity. "Elara, our primary concern is your well-being. We simply wanted to inquire about your well-being. In an attempt to alleviate the prevailing tension, her father made an effort to relax the atmosphere. The sentiment expressed is that, in the event that the other party placed any significant value on the relationship, the actions of the first party would be of consequence. Elara's composure was momentarily compromised, but she swiftly recognized that her authentic sentiments were surfacing. "I am grateful for your concern. As previously stated, a more thorough discussion will be had at a later time." She made this statement and then proceeded to abruptly terminate the conversation, turning around and walking out. Jenna did not proceed in the direction of her parents, who had intended to pursue her. Instead, she positioned herself in front of them. "It is regrettable to inform you that it is strictly prohibited to enter the royal palace without prior authorization. Please return to the opposite door and follow the guards out." Jenna notified them, maintaining a stationary position in front of the door Elara had exited. The woman's claim of kinship with the child was met with resistance, as she was asked who had the authority to prevent her from doing so. Myrna's outburst signaled a complete loss of restraint. It appeared that she was on the verge of becoming enraged and resorting to aggressive behavior, such as biting. She perceived this as a final opportunity to reunite with her daughter. Prior to locating the head councilman at the palace's entrance, it is highly improbable that they would have encountered Elara. "She was your daughter." Jenna's affirmation was delivered with a stern intensity that emanated an oppressive aura, instilling a sense of fear in those present and compelling them to reveal their necks in a gesture of submission. Myrna was unaware of this fact, but Parker was privy to the information that the maids of the palace were meticulously selected werewolves, none of whom were less than a century old. These creatures exhibited a level of potency that rivaled the formidable beta pack, and notably, the specimen before them appeared to surpass even the standard beta pack in its strength. The subjects were compelled to depart, despite their discontent with the outcome of their visit. The following is a list of pertinent sources for further study. Elara proceeded to her guest room, desiring nothing more than solitude. The meeting provoked a recollection of her past, underscoring the absence of a familial environment in her upbringing. After a considerable amount of time had elapsed, she felt capable of rising from her bed and consuming a glass of water. She expressed gratitude that she had been granted a brief respite. Knock. Knock. The response was affirmative. Her response was characterized by a slight hoarseness in her voice, and she appeared to be wiping away tears. "Miss Elara, His Highness requests your presence in the dining room." Jenna informed her of this possibility, smiling slightly in a reassuring manner. "Would you kindly inform him that I am not hungry? I would like to take a more extended period of rest." Elara articulated her sentiments with measured deliberation, expressing a reluctance to expose her eyes to Theron, which had become noticeably red and swollen. Additionally, she exhibited an absence of appetite. "Please accompany me. His Highness has asserted that, irrespective of the circumstances, your presence is imperative. It is imperative to avoid placing me in a challenging or compromising situation." Jenna made an impassioned plea, invoking a compelling rationale that she knew would compel Elara to acquiesce. Elara did not reject the offer and proceeded to the dining room. She anticipated that Jenna would accompany her, but the latter requested that she enter alone. Upon opening the door, Theron's distinctive scent, known to induce a state of calm, enveloped her immediately. Upon entering, her initial thoughts on what to convey to Theron regarding the visit dissipated immediately upon her entry. The room was illuminated by a profusion of sparkling lights, the warm glow of numerous candles, and an abundance of floral arrangements that had previously escaped her notice. The sheer quantity of these elements left her in a state of astonishment. The ambience of the dining area was not consistent with the traditional dining room, rather, it evoked the atmosphere of a romantic restaurant enclosure. However, the aspect that garnered her interest the most was the presence of the most physically attractive man she had ever encountered, who was awaiting her in the center of the room. "What is occurring?" she inquired, attempting to articulate her concerns, but encountering a temporary lapse in her cognitive faculties that precluded her from formulating a coherent response. Theron's attire consisted of a black formal suit, and his countenance remained as inscrutable and austere as ever. However, his gaze radiated a discernible warmth. He refrained from speaking, instead approaching her and closing the door behind her, then guiding her by the shoulders toward the table. Her gait resembled that of a marionette, mechanically moving in accordance with his commands. Upon arriving at the elegant, adorned table, he refrained from assisting her in taking a seat, a gesture he had customarily performed. Instead, he pivoted her shoulders, orienting her to face him, and gradually lowered himself to one knee. The image evoked a marked contrast between the formal attire of the taller gentleman and the more casual dress of Elara, who was seated in an ankle-length wool dress and wearing the customary fluffy slippers he had procured for her. The subject's gaze was directed towards the object, her pupils dilated and her heart rate elevated, as she grappled with the meaning of the object's gesture. Elara was aware of the commitment she had made to him, that she would not mark him until they had successfully rescued Naira. Theron commenced with a deliberate and measured approach. Despite her efforts to maintain composure, she experienced a sense of trepidation, contemplating the possibility that he might have undergone a change of heart. It is possible that the head council member had expressed opposition to the proposal when he arrived earlier today, causing her to experience a sense of emotional distress. "I will honor that commitment, yet I still wish to claim you as my own. Despite my inability to assign a mark akin to that employed by werewolves, I aspire to designate you in the manner characteristic of human marking." Theron articulated his sentiments with the same delicacy as before, extending his hand toward his pocket and extracting a diminutive black box. "Elara, for an extended period, I have experienced a profound longing for the establishment of a family unit. Following the passing of my parents, the most fervent wish I have harbored is to find a significant other and establish a family unit with that person. Will you kindly consider entering into matrimony with me and becoming part of my family unit?" Theron inquired, ultimately disclosing the ring concealed within the black box. The sentimental value of the small ring and the promise of familial connection profoundly resonated with her. She was now convinced that he was apprised of the particulars of the visit, yet he conscientiously refrained from further embarrassment, delicately addressing the contentious subject. Instead, he provided her with solace while refraining from any explicit mention of the subject. He offered her what she most desired, the establishment of a family unit, characterized by the attributes of a traditional family. The response was affirmative. The subject articulated her words with a pronounced hoarseness, her voice betraying a certain emotional distress that manifested as a subtle tremor in her voice. This emotional state was further accentuated by the imminent release of tears from her eyes, which appeared somewhat obscured or clouded. For the first time, she voluntarily embraced him, circling her hands around his neck and timidly planting a kiss on his lips. In a spontaneous gesture of affection, he returned the embrace, furthering the intimate connection with a deepening of the kiss. The following is a list of relevant sources that will assist in the preparation of this paper. The following assertion is made on Monday morning: a beeping sound is audible. A beeping sound is audible. The alarm sounded at a high volume in the quiet room, despite the fact that she had adjusted it to a lower setting. The auditory signal was emitted one final time before the device transitioned into a state of repose for a duration of 10 minutes. Upon hearing the alarm, she opened her eyes, though still feeling somnolent. It required a brief period for her to recognize her location as Theron's room, followed by an additional moment of hesitation as she adjusted to the novel environment. She found it disconcerting to be awakening in his room for the first time. Fortunately, she had not yet moved, and so her initial inclination was to ascertain the position of her body. She was unwilling to risk finding herself in the same position she had on Saturday morning. The following morning, Theron had already departed, thus allowing her to circumvent the potentially awkward situation of greeting him first thing in the morning, particularly in light of the fact that she had initiated a passionate kiss with him the previous night, following his proposal of marriage. To be forthright, the origin of the fortitude that enabled her to perform the act of kissing him herself was not apparent to her. Furthermore, the initially minor display of affection escalated significantly, progressing from a mere light peck on the lips to a profound and passionate kiss. The act left her breathless, her mouth gasping for air, before he released her lips. The emotional accumulation resulting from her parents' visit and his proposal, in conjunction with the residual effects of the wolfbane, which had not yet fully dissipated from her system, induced a state of slumber as he embraced her following their kiss. As her sensory perceptions gradually diminished, she experienced a state of profound relaxation, which continued until she regained consciousness the following morning. Consequently, as she engaged in her official duties for the remainder of the day, she did not encounter Theron. It should be noted that no verbal expression of dissatisfaction was forthcoming. In the aftermath of such an embrace, she found herself at a loss as to how to address him. The subject's prolonged anticipation of the female subject is noteworthy. The quality of his kissing technique is also of interest. The female subject had never previously engaged in similar acts, and thus she was unable to provide a comparison of the quality of the experience. However, she did offer her subjective assessment of the experience, which she found to be. Her face exhibited a reddish hue as she recollected the enrapturing kiss. Despite her efforts, she was unable to determine an appropriate classification for the experience. Admit it. It felt wonderful. Sable employed the use of a mind link to articulate their thoughts with candor. Elara's assessment was that the former was demonstrably more mature than the latter. It is reasonable to hypothesize that the individual in question may have engaged in the act of kissing another person without having accumulated sufficient experience or practice to do so. Elara inquired of the wolf, experiencing a pang of jealousy at the mere thought of him kissing another, which caused her heart to ache. The use of these particular words conveys your favorable opinion regarding his kissing technique, despite your reluctance to articulate it explicitly. Ha ha ha. Sable's reaction was one of mirth. The subject of this discourse has expressed their intent to discontinue further dialogue. Elara articulated her discontent regarding the wolf's manipulation of her words. Subsequently, she recollected that she had initially overlooked her fundamental objective. On the previous day, the woman awoke in a state of solitary wakefulness. However, on the present day, she became aware of the steady respiration of her companion, who had not yet departed. It was to be expected. She had set the clock to 5 a.m. to ensure she had sufficient time to get ready to leave for the academy, as opposed to the previous day when she woke up at 8 a.m. She then engaged in a brief self-assessment, focusing on her tactile perception of her hands and feet. This assessment revealed that no contact was occurring between her and the other individual. She subsequently exhaled, experiencing a sense of relief. With great care and caution, she began to remove the blanket, attempting to ensure that she would not arouse him from his slumber. Her actions were driven by the desire to be fully clothed and composed by the time he awakened. At this juncture, it was already too late. He had already seen her worst morning faces several times. She was aware of this fact, but she still wanted to appear presentable. In an effort to reduce movement, she gradually elevated her head from the pillow. She had barely managed to stabilize her elbow, attempting to muster strength to elevate her body, when she felt a sudden force, and her body collided with the soft mattress. For a moment, she lost focus of her eyes. The next image she perceived was that of his face hovering above hers, his body in a tight lock with hers, before his head flopped down next to hers. What is the nature of your actions? I must prepare to depart. Elara noted that, despite the fact that only a fraction of his body was in contact with her, the weight of his body on hers induced a noticeable flush on her face. What is the intended implication of the actions I am performing? This is merely an effort to acclimate you to our customary morning routine. He articulated gently, his hoarse voice muffled against the pillow near her ear, as he maintained proximity with his head near hers. The subject of this discourse is the morning routine. It is first necessary to define the nature of this routine. It is also necessary to determine the point in time at which this routine was first established. This marks only the second morning that we have awakened in each other's company. She inquired promptly, endeavoring to displace her body slightly from under him. The aforementioned assertion is indeed accurate. The customary morning routine of many couples involves physical affection. It is evident that you were not privy to this information. It is imperative to become acclimated to the act of physical affection. Secondly, it is unnecessary to count the mornings, as there will be a multitude of them. Due to an urgent matter that required my immediate attention, I was compelled to depart yesterday. Regrettably, the timing did not align to disturb your slumber. I apologize for the misunderstanding. I did not foresee that it would cause you such distress. Theron promptly articulated, applying an augmented degree of pressure to her embrace. This individual had a penchant for manipulating her statements. It is imperative to examine the transition from a non-existent morning routine to the subject's complaints about being left alone in the morning. It is evident that the aforementioned statements were never made by her. The inquiry into the provenance of these utterances, specifically whether they emanated from the stern man he was known to be, or whether they were the result of instruction from another, is a crucial element of the investigation. In the event that this was the case, she would be compelled to take the life of the individual in question. In a particular domestic setting, a subject, whose identity remains undisclosed with the intention of preserving anonymity, was observed engaging in physical contact with a companion. This occurred in the context of the subject's embrace with the aforementioned individual. It is noteworthy that the subject's actions coincided with a pronounced sneezing episode, which was audibly perceived by those present. The following text is intended to provide a comprehensive overview of the subject matter. Theron, I assure you that the issue did not perturb me. I must request your indulgence as I prepare for my scheduled classes. She articulated her discomfort, attempting to extricate herself from the situation. She experienced an acceleration in her heart rate, perceiving his warmth and touch. Yesterday. He articulated his response in a deliberate manner, not providing an immediate response to her initial inquiry. Yesterday? She reiterated her point when he failed to continue his previous statement. Throughout the day, she did not encounter him. As she fell asleep, he did not return to his room. She did not engage in any exceptional activities, she merely engaged in a brief exercise routine and attempted to catch up on her academic obligations. The inquiry that was posed yesterday remains to be clarified. I missed you. Only 5 more minutes. Theron then proceeded to plead, albeit in a deliberate and measured manner. The utterances he made induced a state of physical arousal, characterized by a tingling sensation that traversed her body, exacerbated by the proximity of his body to her own, leading to an escalation in her body temperature. She had never experienced such a profound sense of necessity from another individual, not even from her sister, who had previously been dependent on her. The subject ceased all physical movement and allowed the male subject to maintain physical contact for a duration of time. She could not deny the appeal of his embrace. The act of physical affection persisted for several minutes until the sounding of the alarm, which provided the young woman with an opportunity to disengage from his embrace and hastily proceed to the restroom. Upon exiting the bathroom, she discovered that he was no longer in the room. Despite the fact that she had observed him during breakfast, she did not perceive his shadow. The king's work required a significant investment of time, and the duration of this endeavor was further extended due to the accumulation of tasks during his absence. Jenna elucidated the matter for her. Elara was aware of this sentiment, yet she wished to see him briefly before her departure for the academy to bid him farewell. She would not encounter him again until Friday. Upon awakening, she experienced a state of agitation, which led her to neglect the opportunity to engage in further physical contact with him. Expressing her disapproval with a gesture, she endeavored to clear her thoughts, making her way toward the vehicle that was to convey her back to the academy. It was evident that the individual's unabashed demeanor was exerting a gradual influence on her own behavior. Jenna, positioned behind her, relinquished her bag to the driver, asserting her role in transporting it from her room and adamantly rejecting Elara's offer to carry her own bag. The domestic worker apprised her of her current circumstances, which initially provoked a sense of trepidation upon her arrival in the room each morning, as evidenced by her immediate inclination to bow in deference. Despite Elara's attempts to halt her, the latter remained unyielding. She maintained this posture until Elara acquiesced to articulate the designated utterances of the Queen. This was accompanied by the assertion, "I give you permission to raise your head." She experienced a sense of discomfort when articulating the statement, yet Jenna did not raise her head until she had precisely expressed the sentiment. "Proceed with caution, my lady." The domestic servant greeted the visitor with a smile as she opened the door. She exhibited a slight smile and nodded, entering the vehicle. Theron. She then directed her attention to the handsome man who was already seated in the back seat, his laptop open on his knees, typing with great concentration. Yes? He then elevated his head, indicating a willingness to engage in further discourse. The inquiry post sought to ascertain whether the individual in question would be attending the academy. She inquired, exhibiting a degree of elation derived from the encounter, prior to her departure. I will only accompany you until we reach there. I sincerely apologize for not partaking in breakfast with you. It is acceptable. Your presence is unwelcome, as your time is already committed. She immediately expressed her opinion that he should not have expended the effort, as he still had work left to complete. This assessment was based on the observation that he was still typing. I am unaware of whether I will be able to see you until Friday. It is only logical that I at least bid you adieu. Theron's response was affirmative, accompanied by a smile. The smile left Elara, who had not yet become accustomed to the handsome face, and the driver, both aghast. The man had always been responsible for operating the vehicle for His Highness, and he was unaware of the king's capacity to exhibit such a compassionate countenance. For the duration of the brief journey to the academy, both parties engaged in a period of silence. The woman did not wish to disrupt his work. She was content simply to remain in his presence for a longer period of time. Ensure that your mobile device remains in your immediate vicinity at all times, please. Theron stated the following as the vehicle came to a halt in front of the Moonlight Students' building. In my personal time, I will. However, it is not permissible for me to do so during class time. As she was on the verge of grasping the door handle, she provided a detailed explanation. The response was affirmative. Theron stated that she would no longer attempt to persuade her. At that point, I will take my leave. Take care. She stated, with a certain degree of discomfort, that she had no further motivations to engage in discourse with him. Wait. Theron observed her head turning toward the door. She turned towards him, her ears attuned to his voice, to ascertain what further information he might impart. However, she experienced only a gentle peck on the lips from his soft, warm ones. It must be noted that the act of bestowing a farewell kiss was overlooked. He made this remark with a touch of levity in his voice. She nodded slightly, her face reddening, and promptly exited the vehicle. She did not proffer a response to his words. Accepting the bag from the driver, she proceeded toward the stairs, intending to ascend them. She was on the verge of arriving tardily for her classes. At this juncture, the operator of the vehicle that had previously closed the door from which the passenger had disembarked returned to his seat and proceeded to drive the vehicle away. A vocalized utterance signifying the presence of an individual, often accompanied by a gesture or gesture-like expression. A number of voices expressed astonishment. Upon raising her head to acknowledge the voices, she was immediately approached by a group of men who descended the stairs expeditiously to greet her. At last, we have the opportunity to make your acquaintance. The young men expressed their elation as they rapidly approached her. She did not have the opportunity to observe the specific members of her pack who greeted her, as Jackson had already embraced her with considerable strength. The subjects expressed profound relief upon receiving communication from the individual in question. The last point of contact occurred 5 to 6 days prior, however, subsequent messages were not acknowledged. It was only yesterday that the subjects received a response, which was transmitted via text message. There was a genuine concern that she was not in good health and that her condition had regressed. Despite the passage of several seconds, Jackson did not release her. The other men were also present, attempting to participate in the huddle. "Sufficient, sufficient. You are suffocating her," Jackson stated, endeavoring to dissuade the others from approaching her. However, he merely received disapproving glances from the others, each individual presupposing that he was the most righteous one among them. "Are you currently in a state of well-being, Alpha?" The patient's face exhibited a red hue, which prompted the inquiry into the presence of fever. Jackson inquired, his voice tinged with concern, managing to distract the others from their current focus. "No, I do not have a fever. I am currently in good health. It is possible that the cold is the cause." Despite her awareness that the underlying cause of her redness was not related to her skin tone, she attempted to rationalize it. "Do you have absolute certainty that your cheeks appear even more red than before?" Zane also took note of this phenomenon. "Indeed, I am. I am currently in good health. We must proceed to our scheduled educational session, as our tardiness may result in significant repercussions." Elara attempted to redirect the conversation by offering a different topic for discussion. The subjects expressed satisfaction upon finally seeing her and confirming, through their own observation, that she was indeed in a state of well-being. Consequently, they proceeded to follow their Alpha into the building. It is evident that her return has led to an increase in the frequency of their interactions. The group, which had been seemingly despondent in recent days, suddenly became animated upon the arrival of Elias in the classroom. It is evident that the individual in question did not choose to accept the information provided, despite the assurance that the subject was in a satisfactory state. Upon observing Elara's presence in the course, he immediately began to reprimand them. It is evident that the group's lack of confidence in the instructor is pronounced. Elias's accusations were made in a seemingly upset state. "Pardon me, Professor, but apart from the courses you teach, the individual in question has demonstrated a pattern of unreliability. We were informed that the Alpha would return in a week, however, 2 weeks elapsed before she truly returned. Consequently, we had ample justification to harbor suspicions regarding your intentions." Zane stated his point, and the others concurred with a gesture of affirmation. "You." Elias's countenance conveyed a state of astonishment as he regarded them. When the subjects were questioned repeatedly on days when Elara was not present, they consistently provided polite responses. However, with the presence of their Alpha, they have regained their sense of self-assurance. He exhaled, disregarding them collectively. Previously held in high esteem by the Moonlight students, the instructor's reputation has undergone a significant decline in recent years, as evidenced by the substantial increase in student enrollment from 2 or 3 students in the past to 10 students in the present. The subjects proved to be quite challenging to manage. In any case, let us redirect our attention to our professional obligations. At present, we are operating as a cohesive team, reminiscent of our previous state. Elias resumed his discourse in a manner reminiscent of his academic persona, characterized by meticulous analysis and systematic thinking. Students, I have been informed by the Dean's office that there will be a slight adjustment to the Academy's security protocols. Consequently, henceforth, it is imperative that individuals maintain constant proximity to their mobile devices. Therefore, it is imperative that students carry their phones with them at all times, including during academic sessions. Elias articulated his perspective with a serious demeanor, despite the evident mendacity of his statements. The subject entertained the notion that he would emulate Theron in terms of shamelessness. However, Theron appeared to be a case of student surpassing teacher. The young woman had barely enrolled at the academy when the man began to bend the rules for her benefit. Why? Ronan inquired, his brow furrowed in contemplation. The subjects were all aware of the stringent regulations that had remained constant for an extended period. In light of the recent attack, the Academy has announced its intention to enhance security measures and undertake a comprehensive review of its existing regulations. Consequently, it is imperative for all individuals to maintain constant proximity to their mobile devices, irrespective of their circumstances. Elias provided a response that was as rational as he was able to formulate. All parties indicated their agreement with a gesture, not by verbalizing their thoughts, but for some reason, Elara sensed that this reason was not the legitimate justification for possessing their mobile devices. It is possible that the aforementioned individual. This behavior could be indicative of a willingness to compromise, as evidenced by his agreement to her reasons for not wanting her phone. If this were the case, she was compelled to inquire whether he had been instructed to behave in such a manner. A sternutation was emitted. Elias's sternutation was pronounced. My apologies. It is possible that I have contracted a respiratory illness, as this is the second instance of sneezing I have experienced today. Elias stated, wiping his nose with a tissue. The notion of a werewolf succumbing to the common cold is a curious one. This inquiry appeared to be a salient point of curiosity among the students. Concurrently, in other regions with the wind ruffling her curly, long black ebony hair, a jubilant witch rode merrily on her black broomstick, adorned with dark purplish tulle. Subject A exhibited a lateral head movement in synchrony with the auditory content from her AirPods, which was characterized by a jovial nature. Concurrently, she engaged in mastication of a pink-hued piece of bubble gum, intermittently producing bubbles. Her Lolita's short black dress, embellished with ribbons and secured by a corset around her waist, complemented by purple tights, black leather boots, and a purple ribbon gently securing a strand of hair, effectively dispelled any allusions to witchcraft. At intermittent intervals, as she experienced the auditory stimulus, she would oscillate her broomstick in the atmosphere, ascending to elevated altitudes and descending to subterrestrial levels, traversing the canopy of the arboreal ecosystem. Her proximity to the ground was so great that she was able to reach for and collect flowers from the ground, which she did on occasion. The subject was observed smelling the wild magnolias she had harvested from a tree, and she appeared to be in a state of euphoria. Her body language suggested a state of carefree joy, reminiscent of a child's playfulness. It was noteworthy that her physical posture, with feet dangling in the air, further contributed to the impression of childlike exuberance. The subject's physical features, including the small, white, porcelain-like face, almond-shaped hazel eyes, bright pink cheeks, small, pointed nose, and pouty lips, collectively contributed to an impression of youthfulness that, optimistically speaking, could be likened to that of an 18-year-old girl. However, taking a more pragmatic stance would likely result in the conclusion that the subject's age was not discernible. It is challenging to ascertain the precise age of the witch, as she appears to be centuries old. It is noteworthy that she would not disclose her true age to others. In reality, Esme would become indignant if one were to attempt to guess her age, regardless of whether the guess would indicate that she appeared younger or older than her actual age. The subject was considered taboo, and it was the only factor capable of transforming her typically cheerful disposition into a more somber one. Have you ascertained that this is indeed the correct approach? An inquiry was directed towards the diminutive feline of dark pigmentation, which was positioned at the extremity of the elongated broomstick. The diminutive creature was adorned with a ribbon similar to that of the female subject, and its physical state was characterized by a high degree of fluffiness. However, it was noteworthy that under certain provocation, the creature exhibited a sharp tongue. Undoubtedly, it is the case. It is evident that Lilo and Claude exhibit behaviors consistent with this paradigm. The letter explicitly stated this. Esme's self-satisfied affirmation was accompanied by the deliberate placement of the letter before the cat, which provoked a mild disturbance in the feline's emotional state. This interruption occurred during the cat's preferred musical composition. Examine the document more closely. We have passed by the route delineated in the directions Lilo inscribed for you half an hour ago. The black cat was observed, exhibiting signs of contentment as evidenced by the expression of satisfaction expressed by a gentle licking of the animal's diminutive black paw. Esme rapidly halted the broomstick's forward motion, widening her eyes in a display of sudden awareness. She then pivoted swiftly, without further hesitation. Demonstrating a heightened level of attentiveness, she meticulously examined the contents of the letter, yet failed to acknowledge the inaccuracy in her perception of the situation. It should be noted that the cat did not display any inclination to determine the correctness of the statements made. Instead, she merely oscillated her head from side to side, thereby conveying her disapproval. The efficacy of the ring is yet to be ascertained. The feline was posed the question, and she responded with a display of lethargy, head resting on her forelimbs, and a pendulous movement of her caudal appendage from one side to the other. Despite the rapid acceleration of the broomstick, she maintained an unperturbed posture, evincing no difficulty in her ability to sit quietly. Esme was unable to respond, as her attention was diverted by the rapid approach of a dove. The avian, characterized by its pristine white coloration, alighted on the finger that had been elevated, a maneuver that appeared to be an innate response. Subsequent to this, the creature underwent a metamorphosis, transforming into a white sheet of paper. Clarissa perused the letter expeditiously. These epistles, received intermittently from Sable, served to apprise Elara of the wolf's current circumstances, a practice undertaken whenever Elara was asleep. This method of communication was employed to maintain a continuous dialogue with the Wolf Queen, who functioned as a source of information regarding the subject's emotional states. "What does it say?" The cat inquired about the information Esme had not yet disclosed, given her continued silence on the matter. It is imperative that the efficacy of this solution be demonstrated. Sable was compelled to euthanize Naira. It appears that time is rapidly elapsing. The cat ceased its aimless wandering. Assuming that Sable's actions were intended to maintain Naira in a state of dormancy, it can be deduced that the available time to assist the wolf was limited to a period of approximately 1 year. It is a common misconception that sufficient time remains to devise an alternative solution if the initial approach proves unsuccessful. However, this assumption is erroneous. The present solution was among 10 potential solutions that were researched over the course of the past 8 years, since the discovery of Elara in the forest. It was the final one, and it should be noted that the ring required time to exert its influence. The question of whether the available time would be sufficient was raised. Very well, now that the issue regarding the modification of the established regulations has been addressed, let us proceed with the scheduled curriculum for our history class. Elias attempted to divert the students' attention, fearing that someone might discover a flaw in his announcement or its underlying rationale. It is evident that he was compelled to be absent from the meeting with the council. It is imperative to ascertain which significant taboos have been identified throughout our extensive historical record as having provoked the ire of the goddess. Elias inquired, seizing his book and assuming a forward-leaning posture at his desk. No one? He reiterated his inquiry upon observing that none of the 10 students had raised their hands. Elara, would you be so kind as to share your insights on this matter? He regarded the girl as if he were a teacher who would appoint the student he favored in class. In the absence of an answer to his query, the collective knowledge of the group was equally deficient. The 7 great taboos, committed throughout history, are collectively known as the peccata predecessors, or the sins of the predecessors. These taboos represent the only instances in which a mistake made by a particular creature led to direct action by the goddess. Elara responded with apparent ease. I am grateful for this opportunity. Indeed, as is widely recognized, all creatures under the rule of the goddess including, but not limited to, vampires, witches, werewolves, and fairies are endowed with free will. It is evident that, under certain conditions, the goddess is unlikely to intervene in the lives of the creatures, provided that the 7 sins are not committed. However, throughout history, there have been instances where these 7 taboos have been transgressed. It is inevitable that there will always be individuals who, due to their own personal convictions, assume that the goddess will not intervene in any capacity. However, historical evidence suggests that, on occasion, her intervention has occurred, albeit in a manner that may not be immediately apparent. Would any of you be so kind as to enumerate them for me? Elias made a subsequent inquiry, observing a subsequent absence of audacious respondents, and thus requested that Elara provide a response. Elara, would you be so kind as to enumerate them? Indeed, as indicated by the attribution of Latin numerals, the peccata predecessors, or the sins of the predecessors, are as follows. The act of consuming the flesh of mermaids is referred to as unness, a practice that is believed to bestow eternal life upon the individual who partakes of it. 2. Duo, the act of surreptitiously appropriating the inverted scale of a black dragon results in the transfer of ownership of the dragon to the thief. The third element of the series is the creation of artificial werewolves, also known as lichens. These artificial werewolves bestow upon a human the powers of a werewolf. The act of 4, quatuor, involves the theft of the ashes of a phoenix before it can complete its resurrection. This act bestows upon the perpetrator the ability to regenerate and even restore health to the brink of death. Kunk is the term used to describe the use of black magic by a witch to summon a demon, which grants the said three wishes. 6. Hexa, the creation of more than 100 ghouls by a pure-blood vampire, thereby effectively creating an undead army. 7. Septum, denotes the act of slaying any ruler or any type of supernatural creature that has been directly appointed by the goddess. Elara articulated her sentiments with a sense of profound relief as she concluded her enumeration. Fortunately, this was among the items she reviewed the previous day. Yes, I am very grateful to you. This characterization is accurate. Indeed, any of these particular facts will undoubtedly incur the wrath of the otherwise gentle goddess. One of the evidentiary indicators of provoking her ire is the assassination of the Queen of all Dragons by the White Dragons. Elias asserted this position to demonstrate the authenticity of the 7 taboos, which were purported to be factual and not mere myths as was commonly believed at the time. The student expressed surprise at the existence of white dragons, indicating a prior belief that dragons were exclusively black in color. Liam was the one to whom the inquiry was directed. This was a fact that was known by all of them. Correct, the contemporary absence of white dragons is well documented, but their existence in the distant past is a matter of historical record. Historically, the goddess has communicated to the dragons the identity of their prospective queen, who heretofore has been a typical village girl. The young girl, characterized by her naivete and susceptibility to manipulation, was guided by the white dragons into their palace. There, she underwent a process of indoctrination and transformation into a puppet ruler, rather than being prepared for the role of an authentic leader and being instructed in the proper use of her authority. Eventually, Cleo, the queen, developed romantic feelings for a black dragon. This was due to the actions of one of the dragons, who had expressed disapproval of the white dragon's use of their queen for their own purposes. The rifts between these two factions ultimately culminated in a devastating war between the black dragons and their white counterparts. The war culminated in a tragic outcome, marked by the Queen of the Dragons' loss of her abilities and profound sorrow for her deceased lover, who had perished on the battlefield moments earlier. This event led to the decimation of more than half of the dragon population, including the Queen herself. Elias expounded upon a segment of the broader historical narrative. The subject's position is that the goddess's intervention is not explicable on the grounds that the queen killed herself and did not perish at the hands of another dragon. Jackson inquired, captivated by the narrative, which resembled a fable more than an authentic historical account. The involvement of the dragons in the queen's loss was more or less indirect. In order to maintain their superiority on the battlefield against the black dragons at that time, the dragons feasted on the queen's wings, which possessed the capacity for continuous wound regeneration. They caused her harm and spilled her blood, disregarding her well-being, until she lost control of her powers. Elias expounded on this topic with great fervor, his elation palpable as he sought to engage the students' attention. Indeed, history emerged as the subject he found most conducive to teaching. Consequently, they perpetrated the seventh taboo, killing their own ruler. This provoked the ire of the goddess, ultimately leading to their complete eradication. Despite the existence of extant black dragons, the prospect of encountering a white dragon remains highly improbable. Upon the demise of the queen, a precipitous decline in the health of all white dragons was observed, including those who had not participated in the war. This decline ultimately led to their demise. There is a prevalent rumor that the white dragons that did not engage in the war may have contributed to the goddess's anger, owing to their passive stance. The black dragons exhibited a demonstrated commitment to their queen, engaging in combat on her behalf. In contrast, the white dragons, who did not actively engage in hostilities, also did not provide any form of assistance. It is imperative to acknowledge that within the werewolf community, the transfer of leadership authority is traditionally initiated from the progenitor to his progeny. Consequently, the monarch's position is considered an inherited title. However, the selection of the monarch's consort has historically been attributed to the goddess, who determines which werewolf possesses the queen's half-soul, thereby influencing the outcome of this significant decision. Despite the absence of definitive evidence to substantiate this claim, it is noteworthy that the goddess herself never ascertained it, in contrast to her meticulous investigations of the dragons. Moreover, it is a salient fact that no queen of ours has ever succumbed to unnatural causes. Consequently, while it is not possible to ascertain the consequences of a hypothetical assassination of the king, the potential repercussions of the murder of the future queen could engender an even more profound calamity if this fact were to be substantiated. Elias articulated his perspective with candor. In reality, when he requested Elara's assistance in assisting Theron with his treatment, he had indeed acted impulsively. He was regarded as one of the most competent officials in the kingdom, known for his ability to assess situations with detachment and take decisive actions. At that time, he became enraged upon seeing his companion injured so severely. Additionally, Elara's identity as the Maid's King was ambiguous. He requested her assistance, but if she had perished, would the goddess have intervened? It should be noted that the council members and the aforementioned individual had collaborated in an effort to secure a romantic partner for Theron. It is imperative to consider whether Theron's decision to await Elara's arrival influenced the subsequent events in any manner. The seventh taboo, while mentioning the killing of a ruler, did not address the matter of forcing a king to accept his mate. The goddess, according to the text, does not force mates together. Furthermore, no king in the past has ever refused his mate, which makes this fact difficult to verify. The instructor exhaled, relieved that the inquiries would persist merely as speculative musings, and proceeded with the instructional session. At this juncture, the student's full attention was focused on him. Now, returning to the matter of dragons, it is important to exercise restraint in evaluating them. We, too, have our own werewolves who demonstrate similar levels of foolishness. It is a well-documented historical fact that werewolves are incapable of biting a human and subsequently allowing that human to live, due to the potentiality of said human transforming into an artificial werewolf. The probability of this occurrence is minimal, estimated at approximately 1 in 10,000. However, the transformation into an artificial werewolf remains a possibility. It is imperative that we ascertain the rationale behind the nomenclature attributed to the human specimen that has survived the bite of a werewolf. Elias inquired, and upon observing that Ronan had raised his hand, nodded, indicating that Ronan was to respond. Werewolves are typically born with two distinct aspects, a human and a wolf. However, in the case of humans who become artificial werewolves through a bite, the wolf aspect is not present. It is evident that the subjects in question would not possess a distinct personality, as would typically be associated with the intervention of the goddess. Consequently, they would be incapable of undergoing a complete transformation into a genuine wolf. Instead, they would undergo a partial transformation, resulting in a chimeric state, akin to a lichen. Elias's affirmation signaled his satisfaction with the response, as it was accurate, and he proceeded to elaborate further on Ronan's description. Indeed, an artificial werewolf is incapable of becoming a genuine werewolf. Consequently, it would never be possible for such a creature to procreate with another of its kind, as the mates are separated into halves prior to birth. Not born as werewolves, they would not have a soul shared with another werewolf. The issue at hand is as follows: it is challenging for a werewolf to transform a human into a werewolf. However, once a human has been transformed into a werewolf, the probability of that werewolf transforming another human into a werewolf increases. In the event of a bite from a werewolf, 1 in 10 humans will undergo transformation. The remaining 9 individuals will perish in the process. Furthermore, lichens are considered to be savage creatures, lacking the capacity to maintain their sanity. These individuals have been observed engaging in aggressive and indiscriminate attacks against those who stand in their way. As the transformation process progresses, the werewolves exhibit increasing levels of savagery and mindlessness. Notably, the werewolf who undergoes the transformation is influenced by a werewolf that is more distant from the original progenitor of the werewolf lineage. This transformation is initiated by a bite from a werewolf that has been bitten by a werewolf. Even human settlements have been decimated in the course of these conflicts, which has the potential to result in our exposure to the human population. In contrast, new vampires possess the ability to retain their mental faculties and exercise some degree of control over their newly developed instincts. The goddess has maintained a delicate equilibrium with the human world, exercising dominion only over supernatural entities and refraining from harming others, even those who are not under her authority. It must be noted that lichens are regarded by her as an aberration, a mutation in her own creation. Incurring the goddess's fury would result in the immediate demise of the werewolf who would break this taboo by creating a lichen, as well as anyone assisting him, regardless of their species. Teacher, on what grounds would a werewolf ever elect to undertake such an endeavor? The impetus behind the transformation of a human into a lichen remains a subject of speculation. Zane was perplexed by the inquiry. The question that must be posed is, why would any werewolf choose to transgress the taboo and commit suicide? In contemporary times, werewolves do not exist under the rule of a king. However, in the distant past, before the unification of packs under a single werewolf, these creatures were subject to intense persecution. Consequently, a series of rash decisions were made. A subset of werewolves opted to bite the hunters, operating under the assumption that the creation of werewolves would compel the other hunters to abstain from attacking them, given that members of their families were also werewolves. However, the complexity of creating a lichen was not duly recognized. The creation of such a creature would necessitate the killing of thousands of hunters. Ultimately, the endeavor to create one proved unsuccessful. Consequently, the group found itself increasingly targeted by a group of hunters driven by a desire for retribution. In order to forestall their imprudence, the goddess established that taboo, and in a sense, it was also for their protection. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.